How are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 12 of the Simpa Life Podcast. I am joined, as always, by Mr. Macca. How are you doing, brother?
For those watching at home, I'm fine. I wasn't picking my nose, I swear. I wasn't. I was just scratching. It might have looked like I was, but I definitely wasn't.
You know
You'll have to take my word on that. But I am doing well. I hope you all are doing as well as I am with my finger up my nose tonight.
Wonderful. Wherever you have your fingers this evening, folks, I hope you're enjoying it. Episode 12 sees us being joined by two wonderful guests. We are joined by Gav Lawson and Ashwin Kaboko Bolar. Sorry about the...
Bolar, Kaboko's... that's just my Facebook name. I should really change that. People keep...
You should, because when I went to research, I was like, that is a cool last name.
No, yeah, well, it's my capoeira name, but it's just Ashwin, Ash to my mates, Schwinn Badder to whomever.
So, well, it's
your capoeira name. Are we allowed to throw
Yes.
Yes, feel free.
As you like.
Your capoeira name, you wanker.
Yeah, that's deserved.
Anyway, these two wonderful gentlemen that you may very well know as Gav and Ash are from THTC, the Hemp Trading Company. I've been wanting and waiting to get these two on here for quite a while now. They are two of the people that I first met when I moved in towards activism and sort of club work many a moon ago now. And the two people that have had my back for a long time, and a company that I very much respect for their ethics and for their outlook and the way they handle things. So without further ado, I will throw you over to Mr. Gav Lawson to give you a bit more of an introduction onto the company.
Hey, cool. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity, Simpa, and we very much appreciate and love your work as well. And it's good to see you rocking a proper T-shirt as well. So good work, man. So THTC. So essentially, I started THTC with my brother and Dan Sodergren, who's a friend. He runs a company called Great Marketing Works now. So they were at university in Hull together 25 years ago. So about 24 years ago, they started a society called Hempology, which was essentially a concept for a bunch of people that like getting stoned in Hull to hang out and get stoned in Hull whilst talking about hemp products. So essentially what they did, which is kind of what we carried on with THTC, is running alongside existing club nights in Hull, in a couple of the local student nights, for which they would essentially have a table, hand out a load of flyers, and have a load of samples from hemp plastics to textiles, cosmetics, all sorts of stuff. There's not a lot to do in Hull 25 years ago anyway. So it very quickly became the second most popular society in the university after football within a few weeks. So they did really, they were onto something, struck a chord. I got to get stoned and talk about environmentalism. And my brother was actually studying politics and environmental politics at uni. So he then wrote his dissertation on hemp. So that's how it was first brought to me. He and a few of his mates then went off to start a company called THC, the Hemp Collective, which was essentially cosmetics. So when that failed pretty badly, because they didn't really know what they were doing, after a year or so, I was studying advertising in Bristol at UWE. And I came in and we decided to start up THTC. Now, we really just wanted to start a hemp company. So we're not from a fashion background and anything like that. And we just thought, what's the best and easiest way, or we thought would be the easiest way, to get into getting hemp to the high street, which was our goal. And we decided on clothing. So from that clothing, we then started with a full range, which was, I know that I'm going to kind of merge into the next question, because you were saying this next question is, where do we get our raw materials? So we started that in Romania because we wanted something close to home. There was not a lot of options at the time for hemp textiles at all. Romania, China, and Nepal were the three places that we could really source from. So we started in Nepal. We started in Romania. Went out there and had a look around some of the factories, and the fabrics were very much as people. Still, a lot of people still think of hemp fabrics as, really rough, coarse. We used to call it camel's pubic hair because that's pretty much what it felt like. But the fabrics were very much sackcloth back then. Yeah. But that's where we started. We then moved the production to Nepal. But very quickly it became obvious that China were so far ahead of the game in terms of their textiles, their fabrics in hemp, and their understanding of how to actually use it, that we switched our production to China, and have been there using Chinese hemp ever since. So 21 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that was very concise and well answered. This is one of the things that I suppose as a company that's always really I've respected about you guys is that you upcycle old season garments. You try to always use your own. It's a carbon neutral, carbon negative organic cotton.
Yeah,
and obviously the hemp as well. So I think that you really live by the philosophy of the company, which is something too few you see flashy marketing gimmicks, and then you see a cheap product. Whereas you very much built a company and an ethos around this. Built a company around this ethos.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we try to do. I mean, as I mentioned, I was studying advertising at UWE. I wanted a way to use my skills or use, the knowledge that I'd gained doing that. But, when you look at advertising, when I look at advertising, what is obvious to me is that a lot of products, a lot of the issues with the world are based on advertising and marketing and taking a product or an industry that is essentially demerit, it's not good for us or not good for the planet, and using clever advertising to sell it to people. Coca-Cola being, you can edit that out, but Coca-Cola, McDonald's being prime examples, of products that are really bad for you, bad for the planet. But everyone thinks, kids recognize Ronald McDonald before they recognize, or Santa Claus before they recognize anything else, essentially. So wanted to kind of use some of advertising, the tools in the advertising box, to help to sell beneficial, properly sustainable products. So, for me, I don't want to use techniques to sell shit to people. And so we always started with the product had to be as sustainable and as eco as it possibly could for us to believe in it. So yeah, we've tried to stick to that as rigidly as we can.
And
excellent.
I can hear some people sort of grumbling at a few bits and pieces in there, but I mean, for me, it's like using advertising and marketing, which, do you know what I mean? All of the tropes that, as you rightly say, have been used in such a negative way, in a positive way. I have no fucking problem with that in the slightest, and I can't really see how anybody would. Do you know what I mean? That's called playing the fucking game. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? That's just being clever about it. Those tools exist. You know what I mean? The end application is what gives it the sort of the morality, I guess, or the good or bad part of it, I suppose. Yeah, I'm sorry.
But no, that's fine. But I mean, if you look at where hemp was 100 years ago, 80 years ago, then it was arguably a PR propaganda. Well, it was a PR marketing campaign that essentially rubbished the plant and all of its byproducts. So, it was really marketing and newspapers that were responsible for this propaganda, So there's still a lot of people today who still don't know any more about hemp now than they did 20 years ago, which is a failing on all of our parts, I think. But, the media has a lot to answer for.
Yeah.
I've got to, sorry, just to jump back in after I was unceremoniously dumped off the internet by my dodgy Wi-Fi router. Sorry, completely missed the start of that question, but I imagine that we're talking about the prohibition of hemp, why hemp isn't in the place that it should be. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, that's
what we're touching on, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's, again, so we can look at this and trace this straight back to, its roots in prohibition and what prohibition was meant to do. Looking at it just simply as a way in terms of the oil barons, the timber barons and the paper barons were looking to monopolize their hold on capital. That's one way of looking at it, but also the entire kind of the very notion of hemp. I mean, you guys know hemp is one of the most aggressive kind of crops out there, meaning that it can grow anywhere under any circumstances to grow a profitable batch of hemp enough to, say, supply, sails, ropes, all that kind of thing. You don't need that much of a land. Now, we've got to also think about the time that, Prohibition started. We're not like more than, 20, 30 years from the end of slavery. We've got a lot of black people, and some of those black people fought for the Northern armies, and they've got money, and they've got a little bit of land. I mean, one of the whole kind of things about the promises that Lincoln passed on to the black people of America was that they would get, I think it was something like 4 horses and 4 acres, or something like that, or is one horse and 1 acre, something like that. Now imagine a newly freed people who are able to take advantage of their own lives through growing hemp, through producing fiber, through creating their own economy. That was a bigger threat to them than, for example, the dominance of their particular industries, because you couldn't really control that industry. The cotton gin needed labor, like all of those kind of things. You were looking at, like, if black people had their own kind of land, if they had their own economy, they wouldn't be going to work in the fields, they wouldn't be going to work on the gins, they wouldn't be going to work in all of these different kind of areas that we now see them, the essential services, frontline services. I mean, that's essentially Prohibition, hemp. It's all so connected, and we have to, and I think it's a really kind of important thing to note that, I think I'm just dribbling out there because I think
it was good.
Too big of a hit on my.
No, but it is a good point that raises that obviously. I think unfortunately the line of prohibition is separated dependent on, I suppose ultimately in some ways the color of your skin. If you are of sort of white descendants, then you will typically go towards the greed side of the argument. Whereas then if you are a minority or someone who has been a victim of oppression, you will more see the racism and see the frankly, as I would say, fascism that was behind prohibition, the idea to control people's consciousness. And as you said, to deny a newly freed people an opportunity towards self-sufficiency, because the prohibition of hemp is far beyond, started a lot earlier, than cannabis. So that started in the mid 1800s was when it was first started restricted in various territories around the world, using a more, before even starting to use the moralizing argument, but it wasn't around sort of what we would consider modern reefer madness. It then played more into that idea you spoke of self-sufficiency, that was the ultimate threat, is that if people can literally take a crop and grow from it food, clothing, shelter, and then a cash crop at the end of it as well, on desolate lands, ultimately, because cannabis then re-nutrifies the topsoils of where it's growing. So if they were then met with what should have been the reparations and given that land, very quickly they could use this crop to turn that into very quality arable land and become profitable and prosperous. And I think that was dangerous to the overarching racist inclinations of the people at the time.
I have to admit, I had never thought about it like that. So I've literally just proven what you've just said to be completely true. But I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. I can't help but think about that.
And that first propaganda was obviously spread through newspapers, which were owned by William Randolph Hearst, who controlled all the timber. So this is the thing. If you don't have any people who are dirt poor, if you don't have anybody that is kind of struggling to survive, who are you going to get to man the production line at your, automobile facility that doesn't pay minimum wage before a time of minimum wage? This is part and part. I mean, this whole notion of self-determinism, of this relationship of employer to employee. I mean, it's part and parcel of this whole thing. It's developing on from what you said, Simpa.
Yeah, it's almost like a war on individual autonomy is what we've seen for the past few hundred years, and I think what we're now seeing in the 21st century is cannabis and hemp, however you want to define the difference between them at this point, being that tool that can empower us again. I mean, one of the questions I did want to talk to you guys about was about domestic production of hemp. Can you see a day when we will grow hemp in the UK? Because, I mean, post-Brexit, we're kind of screwed as a little island nation if we're not got no treaties, and the EU are literally now taking bacon sandwiches off tourists traveling in Holland.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been hoping for over two decades since we started THTC and expecting the domestic hemp market to have grown and, you know, to have blown up by now. But I mean, obviously it's very related, the hemp industry is very related to cannabis law as well. And as cannabis law is loosening around the world, you'll see obviously in the US predominantly, but, you know, Portugal as well, even Jamaica and, you know, even Thailand, it seems now, you know, as laws are loosening up, then, you know, if you've got a license to grow any kind of cannabis, then you can grow hemp. So, I mean, it is very much intrinsically linked with law reform, I think. But I mean, also, you know, we are after Brexit, we're going to be struggling for our own exports and our own industry. Definitely. So, I mean, I think this is, if there's anything positive that's going to come out of Brexit for us, it's going to be, I'm not going to say taking back control because it's just such a loaded, but it is. I've said it now, but it is literally, you know, being able to control our hemp industry and really bring it on. So I mean, that is a definite potential positive. But yeah, as I said, it's been 20 years and there's nothing has changed in terms of textile production in this country. Really, there's some hemp being grown by hemp and a few other hemp farms for some plastics and some food, but it's nowhere near. You know, they need to really create industry through the textiles in anywhere outside of China. Really has to happen.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I was just going to say, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that China currently owns half of the world's patents on cannabis-derived technologies.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
So yeah, they are very much ahead of the game. Sorry, what were you going to say, Ash?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like China comes into the conversation because they're a country that have put a lot of public sector funding into developing hemp agriculture, hemp processing, and actually subsidizing that market. So in this country, we're subsidizing fossil fuels, we're subsidizing fracking, we're subsidizing the dairy industry, we're subsidizing all of these kind of sectors of the economy that are failing because they're not environmentally or socially sustainable. One of the biggest problems I think in this country, and it definitely was when we were in the British Hemp Association, was the lack of access to processing, and also the barrier to entry for hemp processing. Now, Paddy from Hempen, I've forgotten his surname now, but I remember one of our meetings, he was talking about the economy of hemp. And we were talking about, I remember in one of our meetings, they were talking about the value per square meter, per square hectare of hemp. And when you look at the hemp fiber in and of itself, I think it's similar. When you just look at the fiber, the value is equatable to wheat, I believe. So when you're asking a British farmer to replace his crop for something else, and he has to get, new seed, all that, there's an overlay on that. When you add CBD and flour onto that, that's the missing piece. But again, you've got the regulatory kind of blocks there. What we need right now is actual political will. I think that in the next few years, cannabis is going. Let's get this right. Cannabis and hemp is legal to grow if you have enough money, and if you have enough land. If you are rich enough, you can do anything in this country. You can get a license for it. You can have a bloody license to grow cocaine if you wanted to, if you had the money. That is how this system works. And I very much see, if we continue down this road of having, a conservative or a neoliberal government, any kind of government that essentially thinks the free market will solve everything, you're just going to get a growth of these, the dominance of, say, British Sugar growing cannabis, GW Pharma growing cannabis, Tilray. You're just going to get mega corporations. It's going to be Cyberpunk 2077 with more bugs and English. Is just a terrible, terrible proposition all the way around. So, like I do see it's definitely going to, like, cannabis legalization is going to happen. Who it's going to profit? That's the question.
Yeah,
that's the question now. Right now, it's, do we want it to be able to profit communities, or do we want it to profit, the people who are already rich? And I think that's a question we have to answer together and through direct action.
I completely agree. On a few points that you raised there, I think, so obviously there is a difference in the UK between a cannabis license and a hemp license. Yeah. So we now know what was announced 2 days ago, the second ever cannabis cultivations license has just been granted in the UK to a company called Northern Leaf, who are based in Jersey. They have, in the statements that were put out in the FT and other such correspondence, they refused to say who their parent company was, who has basically helped establish them. The only information that was made public was that they helped gain some capital from a company called Crystal Capital. But they're very, very quiet and secretive about this, so they've done that. On the other side of it, there's 50 plus hemp licenses, but the vast majority of those are for research purposes, typically universities and whatnot. And at this point, frankly, what the fuck research do we need to do on hemp? Because what they're getting them to do is provide studies that show a lack of efficacy to prop up the government's position on cannabis. We already have known this for a long time, that as one of David Nutt's anecdotes suggested, that when he sat down with one of the leading peers at the time, a sitting MP, said that we need to have evidence-based drug policy, and the MP replied to him, yes, but first we must decide what the evidence is. And it very much feels like that's what the establishment is doing on this side of it. The majority of it is trying to prove cannabis is bad because it's illegal. That's their point of view. On the other side of it, there are a handful of individuals sitting currently in chambers that are directly benefiting from this. So obviously we know about the Victoria Atkins connection, and we know about Theresa May's husband. But then there are also people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who through his investment companies are making money on this. There are then people that are set to profit from a rollout of an international model. So exactly as you say, it's going to be Tilray, it's going to be Aurora, it's going to be Etheria, and all of these other various companies that are going to be given the opportunity to have first dibs, when ultimately it's the individuals who have propped up this industry through prohibition that should be given first dibs to it. Which,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. But you've identified it there. The issue here, in terms of equity, is political will. It's always political will, and part of some of that, I think, comes in the form of how we organize at the moment. What are the organizations? Who are the political figures or entities that are, representing our needs? And also, really, what are the causes that we're banding around? Yeah. I mean, this is something that was, sorry, I don't know if are we going like well off your...
No, we've got, like I said, we've got some sort of structured questions to it, but
you can talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, no, I just didn't want to be like kind of talking, like kind of going off on
not
if you had a...
You stop. No. You're grand. Yeah. You stop.
Cool.
I would just in terms of government sort of intent, though. Did I read an article yesterday that said they were going to allow British Sugar to use a bee-killing pesticide or something like that? Yeah. And they're the only company that's allowed to do it, and they're allowed to use it on sugar beets.
Yep. But it'll also get used for their cannabis production as well, then, because they obviously produce quite a substantial amount of it, which is directly sold to GW and produced into Epidiolex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they need. I think you need neonicotinoids on that kind of stuff. There's essentially the amount of sugar that British Sugar's making is, that's a sizable amount of money.
They control the majority of the market.
Money going into the coffers. So to put the neonicotinoid discussion into context. So like the EU banned it a long time ago. Then the UK banned it like probably about 2 years ago, after a lot of fighting. However, one of the main kind of stakeholders in trying to convince the government not to ban neonicotinoid pesticides is the National Farmers Union. The National Farmers Union of the UK has had for a long time a very questionable kind of, in my opinion, and I'm speaking as a former DEFRA civil servant, is a very questionable relationship with environmental sustainability. In that, I remember when I was working there back in, what was it, 2011, the NFU was pushing for greater levels of PAP in animal feed. PAP, for those who don't know, is processed animal protein. So they were trying to lobby for a higher level of PAP to be fed to cattle, chicken, all that kind of stuff, because it's cheaper. Because it's, there's a lot of this waste animal byproduct around, like from the meat industry. Let's, we can't feed it to humans. Let's slosh it up and, feed it back to the pigs and, fatten them up, etc., etc. Again, more reasons to be a vegan. But I mean, this is, again, like it all comes down to money, and it all comes down to who controls that money and who controls that money in the first place. And so when we are looking to, for example, political institutions to throw our lot behind, we should be looking at those who are talking about wealth redistribution. We should be looking at those who are talking about taking companies and allowing their workers to have some say in the direction of that company.
Definitely.
Marxism, essentially.
Marxism is analysis,
basic Marxism. No, I agree with you.
Whatever. Well,
it is. It's empowering the workers. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, I'd say it's more towards like the tradition of syndicalism, or democratic socialism. But essentially, the way of kind of getting there is, I think you asked one of the questions on our list about, what's the model of, legalization that you'd like?
Well, hang on. Are we going to go? Okay. Are we going to go into that?
We're moving.
Man.
we will loop back shortly.
This is the flow. I mean, natural, loosey goosey. This is the problem with. Actually, you know what? Let's, because I've talked for bloody ages. I think.
All right.
All right. So then we got slightly sidebarred there for all of our listeners and viewers. But as was always going to be the case, getting us a lot together in one chat. So one of the things I did want to discuss, because obviously a lot of people listening to this will be probably smoking cannabis, know about it as a drug and know about the culture of it, but they'll know very little about sort of hemp and cannabis's industrial properties, and so sort of the benefits of it versus things like nylon or cotton, and how it the cultivation and preference of hemp over these other substances or other materials could benefit us.
Sure. So I mean, the first thing about hemp is how easy it is to grow with very little water and little to no pesticides compared with cotton. So cotton being probably the most thirsty crop that can be grown. Hemp can be grown with 10 to 20% of the water. And as Ash alluded to earlier, in pretty much any environment other than Arctic or desert, it does need some water. But it's a weed, so you don't need pesticides. It just grows together and it gets rid of all the other, all the weeds. So it's very, very durable. I'm wearing this hemp. I'm actually wearing 12 pieces of hemp at the moment.
Wow.
14 He's a 12 hemp kind of guy.
Or 14. If we count them like the government counts PPE, then this is 2 items here. So yeah, 14 items of hemp. But this, for instance, is 14 years old. It's very durable. We constantly have people coming out to festivals saying, "Hey, I bought this T-shirt 15 years ago." I'm like, "Cool. Do you want another one?" I'm like, "No, this one's good." So as a company that's supposed to be producing more and more, the fashion industry is all about buying new products. Making hemp products is kind of goes against capitalism, really. Which so they do. It does last a long time. It uses a lot less water. When it comes to the byproducts, they are obviously plentiful. If you're growing cotton, there's not really any byproducts. If you're growing hemp, You know, you've got the seed, you've got the oil, you've got a medicine, you've got a food, you've got a perfectly good engine oil, and a clean plastic, which, you know, for me is a massive one. And in fact, if we hadn't got into hemp clothing, then we probably would have started a hemp plastic company, because it's really, really necessary. But in terms of nylon, I mean, nylon's derived from petroleum, so there's nothing organic about nylon. If you're looking for another crop to maybe compare hemp to, then it would be, you know, a bamboo or a nettle, or modal made out of wood, tencel, all these other things would come originally from an organic product, which they then use a synthetic process to actually produce. Nylon just comes from petroleum, you know, so there's nothing good where that comes from. You know, it can't be biodegraded. It's not biodegradable. It lasts forever. So nylon is about as bad a fabric as you could possibly get for the planet. You know, so hemp is I mean, you know, it is the greenest. It's the third fastest growing crop in the world, after bamboo is the fastest growing, and then kelp, I think a type of seaweed, is the second, which you can also make clothing from. But yeah, I mean, it's very easy to grow. So many byproducts, and yeah, it's still, you know, it can just be grown anywhere. So there are also cheap ways to produce any of these other sustainable fabrics. You know, when I was last in China with my factory, they showed me a hemp viscose, much the same as a bamboo viscose. Essentially, you're taking a natural product, a natural crop like bamboo or hemp, and you're bastardizing it by using loads of chemicals to soften it, using a chemical extraction process, which isn't great, but it starts, you know, originally from an organic, natural product, which nylon doesn't. So yeah, although nylon is extremely cheap to produce, it's very, very costly for the planet. To give you an idea, for a cotton t-shirt, 1 kilogram of raw cotton requires about 10,000 litres to be grown. Imagine 10,000 litres of fresh water. That's for 2 to 3 t-shirts. 10,000 litres. And there are going to be wars being fought over water within our lifetimes, I reckon, unless we do something about it. But there are also there are more sustainable ways to grow cotton now than there were 15, 20 years ago, you know, saving water, saving chemicals. But in terms of mass land usage, hemp and bamboo are the ones that you can, you know, create the most yield from. So yeah, I mean, it's hemp all day, every day, really.
Yeah.
And Gav, like I think a couple of the things that you said there as well, basically hint to, you know, the reasons why, because again, like THTC is the oldest, to my knowledge, one of the oldest, and Gav, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the oldest surviving ethical clothing labels in the UK. One of the, not the, but one of the. Like 20 years, the business has survived.
21 years, Ash. Just because you're not in the office anymore, I carried on.
No, yeah, I know. Whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the thing. Like, so many of these companies operate on such a, like, this is the thing, because the whole kind of idea of a business is that you have sustained profit. Not sustainable, but sustained profit every year.
Sustained growth.
Yeah, sustained growth. And the problem is that when you are pushing like sustainable products, when you're pushing a product that is going to last like a lifetime, like how many, like you need to keep selling and growing your community. And I mean, that was my job. Like when I was at, THTC, I headed up their marketing, and the whole kind of idea of kind of educating people about why a t-shirt, for example, should cost, say, around about £25, and for that £25 you're going to get something that is going to last you and that's going to hold together. It's quite difficult when in your head the method of consumption is that, oh, I buy a new t-shirt every couple of weeks. You're programmed into that because every other product that you've bought falls apart, because that is the culture of our society. It's the culture of a consumerist society. You build something with the kind of worst level of quality of products that you can afford to make the most profit that you can, right? And you pay the least that you can for the labor, and you make as much profit from that as possible. Now, where THTC has always been is that, you know, the company has provided living wages, above living wages for its staff, pays our partners, pay their laborers, pay our garment workers living wages in their respective countries. So, you know, like when you add all of those things together, like, and you are also kind of saying, okay, this is my value, this is how much I've put in. And when you start to kind of put that back to yourself, you start to, there's no profit in there. There's no massive profit. There's no, like, you know, there's no way to make Nike billions or Apple billions from working a fairly equatable business, a fairly run business. You just don't, it's just not possible to do that.
Sure. And your point is particularly pertinent within fashion, because you're told in fashion that last season is last season and you need to get something new for this season. With Apple or with other products, you generally wait for them to wear out, although they're pushed on you. But in fashion, you are, you know, if you're last season, then you're last season, you're left behind. With sustainable and ethical fashion, it's a constant dilemma of how much should we be encouraging people to buy, you know?
Yeah.
And should we be encouraging? That's why, as you said at the beginning, Simpa, one of our proudest things that we've tried to do is encourage people to upcycle and turn old T-shirts into cushion covers or whatever it is, and actually take real pride in wearing something for a number of years. And that's what I'd like the THTC logo to be associated with, something that lasts, not something that you throw away or give away.
Yeah, but somebody, like, just for me on sort of a personal level, and I've said this to you, Simpa, a long time ago before we started this podcast, is like, I have the most T-shirts out of every person I know. No, seriously, right? Because I have a hard time letting them go, and because they mark a point of relatability in my life, that, you know, if it's a positive thing, or if somebody, you know, awesome has given me this T-shirt, I'm very reluctant to give that away. I'll put it away, and I'll, you know, I might wear it, or refresh it down the line or whatever. But I have like sacks of T-shirts that are.
Can you imagine how many I've got?
Yeah, I was just about to say that's where I was going with this. I was like, I can't imagine how many both of you have, and they're a lot better than this thing. Look at this. It's like,
God. I've given myself one of every T-shirt, every colour I've ever done, and they're just sat in a lockup somewhere because I can't wear them all. But yeah.
How many is that, Gav?
Oh God. Well, I'm thinking about starting an eBay store just for my secondhand T-shirts that I'm never going to get around to wearing. I must have about 400 of my own T-shirts just from THTC designs that are boxed up and sitting somewhere. And I'm such a hoarder at the best of times, but when they've got a real value to me, it's even harder. So I think I need to bite the bullet and flog them. They're all medium, so if anyone wants any,
you are a hell of a hoarder, mate. Have you got any of your QPR programs in the background?
QPR,
dude. Like mate, there is three quarters of storage.
I'm hoping that one day I'll actually go up a T-shirt size so I can get rid of all that stuff. But I've got to eat more in the first place. But yeah, there's a lot of hoarding going on.
Oh, so this the way you speak of it, you both allude to a certain kind of painful poetic irony in the being the kind of company that you are and trying to push the kind of ethical consumption that you are is very hard, because without then profit seems to drive everything in the neoliberalistic capitalist world. So they then look, what's profitable? That's where we'll invest. That's why psychedelics are suddenly going to be the next big thing, as cannabis was the next big thing. So until we can somehow show that sustainability it can be more, not profitable in that sense, but profitable in a non-financial way.
Appreciated.
Yeah. And so what is it that people can do? What can advocates do, other than obviously directly support the company? What can we do to get the message louder, you know?
So here's the thing. Hold on, because you mentioned that. Sorry, man. You mentioned the psychedelics thing, and it's very, very important on that point. The reason that psychedelics have a lot of money going into them now is from the U.S. defense sector, from the U.S. government, in treating, and this is we're specifically treating PTSD in war veterans, with the view of getting them back into action, reducing trauma in the first instance. So, you know, there's an economic need for it, but the most important thing here is that that is public funding. That is public funding. That is government funding going in. That's an intervention, putting money into research, funding research in order to, just essentially funding research, creating an academic market.
Sounds very Jacob's Ladder, though. Are they also trying to get people onto psychedelics and then give them machine guns and just make them more war machines?
Wait, was that the story of Jacob's Ladder? Because every time I watch
true story.
I can't ever, like, it's just my whole thing is just some guy dying on a. No.
It's based on a true story about
Okay.
About governments giving people LSD to make them more violent.
Well, yeah, it's all through disclosure in the 30-year rule in America. We know that obviously MK Ultra, Operation Midnight Climax, and things like that occurred where I think it was about 23 years. The CIA basically openly worked with Sandoz to allow anybody with an ology in their profession to have some LSD and go, here, figure out what the hell to do with it. And then once they started to get their academic research back, they started doing some very heinous fucking things. Like, say, Operation Midnight Climax was in, I think it was New York or Philadelphia. And they basically got a brothel and with two-way mirrors. And they got the sex workers to go and lure in the johns and then drug them with LSD and all sorts. So this has been going on for a very long fucking time. But yeah, as you said, they found a way to specifically weaponize it. So it was, I think 2 years ago, MAPS got a huge bit of money from the American government around MDMA, specifically, as you were saying, for treating PTSD. We're now sort of seeing, as we saw with let's call it the Silicon Valley weaponization of microdosing, to improve productivity. So we took all of this stuff of going, here's what we can do to help you as an individual be better in your day-to-day life, have a better connection to the world and a better grip on reality and an understanding of who you are in your position in life. That then very quickly got turned into, actually, if you take this exact amount, your productivity will go through this, which can improve company productivity this much. So you've actually got retreats taking place in San Francisco and shit, where you've got big tech companies sending their executives to go off and have psychedelic experiences, not for their own personal development, but for how it will develop them professionally. And I am probably
the same reason that people don't get tested for ketamine or I mean, for cocaine here or amphetamines, is because a lot of industries would collapse without it, you know?
Hell yeah. Very, very true.
Yeah, like, again, with all of that, we're still in this position where we still need a government intervention. We need political will.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get Boris Johnson legalizing cannabis out of the good of his heart. But I wear my guy on my chest. I mean, like, he's the only, like, one of the key things here, like when we're looking at, for example, like legalization and decriminalization, is that we need some kind of level of public safety. We need some kind of guarantee of quality of product. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that when we look at, for example, the last election cycle, we look at a policy that, for example, there's a couple of policies that Corbyn floated. One of them was this state pharmaceutical company. A state pharmaceutical company operating possibly in a similar way that Vietnam's cannabis legalization is going to work, whereby Vietnamese rural folk can grow cannabis and sell it to the government. Mm-hmm. To a state pharmacy, to a state vendor, to a state marketplace. The state takes on the responsibility for testing, for quality control, for issuing seeds, and your farmers do what they do best, is farm. They don't have to go on Instagram and do some like dodgy bloody Instagram story shots or whatever like they do in America. They don't have to get a blacklist. They don't have to worry about any of that. They just, get up in the morning, go out and farm, like collect a wage. That's it. that's kind of so. I mean, already we see the necessity for like some like state or local authority to be involved. Again, like my ideas about this are that we start in our local areas with our local councils. We start there. We have to start on our local doorstep, and we've got to get organized. I think one of the things I was saying, I keep dipping in and out of the UK organization, so I don't really know what the gossip is yet. I don't know who's doing what or all of that, but from my ears, things seem to have slowed down, especially with COVID. Everyone's got other priorities on. But kind of how has that kind of moved, like generally, because I'm actually lost at the moment. I don't know what's happening.
Ultimately, I would say it's a consequence of the legalization of medical cannabis in the UK, because as we saw, I mean, actually, I probably shouldn't tell that anecdote because it'll get us in trouble, so I shan't. So when we all met previously outside of Parliament and we sort of rallied for the Paul Flynn bill and we were pushing with this, we were all promised that the recreational community would be represented, that if we stand and fight for them, they will stand and fight for us. As soon as it was announced of what was actually put into place, that very much fell away. And we saw activists and advocates become patients overnight. We've now seen this I'm all right Jackism, for lack of better phrasing, which is that, I can get my prescription and I can afford it. Therefore, I'm a legitimate legal entity in person, and it's disempowering thousands of us. So there's something like 2,500 private prescriptions being handed out by these clinics in 2 years. Obviously, none of this is domestically grown product. All of it has got a huge carbon footprint. We have no idea of what's happening with the ethics and the future of the industry that we're supporting in other nations and what they will do to harm their own cannabis community in their country. In the same way that we've seen what GW have done against us as a cannabis community advocating for access and for our own right to grow and consume cannabis as we see. So there's now a three-pronged approach. They've divided us into hemp, industrial cannabis over here, which has then got to fight around the 0.2 THC argument. Then you've got medical going this way, that because they've got licenses and exemptions, they can do what the fuck they like, and they're going off fast and they're making serious bank. Then you've got sort of, I suppose, the CBD and legal market, the people who don't want to be these boys and don't want to get bought out and go full corporate, but they recognize the need for cyclical and continuous growth. And then in the middle is just people like, I suppose, myself, I just want the fucking war over. I just literally want it to be a case where we are all free to do what we want, that nobody is then further persecuted or harmed or imprisoned for what they choose to do in a legal marketplace. So I think there's so much so much lack of discourse and disinformation being spread between these communities that cohesion just isn't there. So it's one of the reasons I started this project, was to try to draw a line under just being a community club and a representative for recreational cannabis, and to actually say that, look, we all need to come together, because we can either fight and get it incremental bit by bit, and we'll have what's left once the investment firms have taken their trillions and gone. Or, as you said, we can create and nurture that political will and actually move forward as a unified entity, fighting for a true robust hemp industry. That means if you grow for CBD flower, you have to then produce using the textile material, or you have to then integrate some way with another company that does so. Cannabis has the potential for zero waste and for maximum profit. As Trev Coleman says, cannabis is a capitalist resource with a socialist agenda. The more we proliferate and the more profit that's made, the better the world seems to become. Look at some of the northern counties in Colorado, and there's kids there that then got free college. There's kids there that have got free meals. That are never going to worry. Obviously, America's still got its structural issues, but the individual counties and regions are trying to figure out how best to create social equity and to use that money. Whereas we have the opportunity in the UK, because we're not broken up in the same way, that if we could have that cohesion, we could fight for a one manifesto, a one ideal, a one unified policy that actually protects and empowers all of us to get on with this and to make reparations for the past 50 years of lives that have been ruined because of this stupid fucking war.
Mate, I absolutely agree with you. One of the things that's really kind of I think something that we need to kind of take note of is the fact that those different groups that you defined, of the cannabis movement, all of that still belongs under under the group of under the part of cannabis that you kind of describe as consumers. Mm-hmm. It's a consumer-based movement, and it's it sounds funny coming from a guy that runs not anymore, like that that was working on marketing for ethical clothing company, to say that a consumer-led movement is actually not as powerful as it should be. It's not as politically compelling. It's not, for example, when we look at like the climate change arguments, if you say to someone, oh, you shouldn't eat, don't eat meat because it's bad for the environment. Don't eat meat because it's cruel. Okay. Don't eat meat because, it's bad for your health. Oh, okay, that's something there. Now, the consumer, there's another part of that when we look at the social movements and the social movements around cannabis. And one of them, which I think is really important, is the idea of criminal support. And I mean, it's at this point I want to shout out the court support crew, and that JJ and Callie and all of that crew who they've been pulling and organising people to go and turn up for essentially turning up to people's court dates. Now that small act of solidarity is enough to build like real networks whereby we can practice mutual aid. Like just turning up to somebody's like court date, that's the first thing. Helping out with their family. You've got a guy who's he's on remand for God knows for growing a few plants or whatever. How's his missus going to cope? How's his kid going to cope? You come in as a community and help this family like look after themselves. Like, because the thing is that you have families and you have communities that are torn apart by the war on drugs. Those families and those communities, those are the ones that you see kind of being radicalized into conspiracy theories, being radicalized into reactionary content. So it's something really important that we have to look at. And I think that like our kind of movement in terms of, I think our movement should be focusing more on for example providing solidarity and support to like the victims of cannabis crimes. Like I would love, for example, the next 420 for there to be like a real focus on prisoners, a real focus on getting like people who just like think cannabis is all about smoking to write to somebody who's in prison for cannabis, for God's sake. Like those little things of human connection, that's kind of where we start emotionally. And once we start emotionally and we connect to people's like material kind of needs, their material conditions, then we can start reading a bit of theory. Then we can start Twitter bullying your local MP. That's where we need we have to start building our own networks of power.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, because so many people are just disenfranchised and disempowered by the way the system has gone. And I think that what I said before about people moving on to prescriptions and kind of going, all right, I'll play the medical paradigm and go off that way. It really placates a lot of their fears, a lot of their worries, and and I think that just kind of, it just detracts from the movement. So exactly that, if we can have that holistic approach of us all trying to help each other out in the little way we can, because we have far more resources than we imagine, and there are far more of us than any of us could possibly imagine, to be honest with you.
Oh gosh,
no, he's fucked off. He's had enough.
I'm here. Sorry, my camera's a bit bouncy. It's been a bit funny. But this actually leads us on to, I suppose I'll combine two questions into one, which was something you alluded to earlier, but we circled back to the original question, which is about legalization versus decriminalization. I kind of hate the question because I think it's obviously very loaded, but it works very well for a discussion topic. So that being said, what are your thoughts on whether we should legalize, decriminalize cannabis, and then would you apply the same model for other drugs?
Well, personally, I think you have to, with decriminalization of all drugs, you have to look at what's been done before and the experiments that have been done before in the Netherlands, for instance, and then more recently in Portugal, and how the Portuguese have dealt with a massive heroin addiction problem they had back in the 1980s, where 1% of Portugal were addicted to heroin. And then there was actually a doctor in southern Portugal called Alvaro Pereira, who approached this and tackled it and really got into, the cause of the addictions and essentially treated victims, as addicts and not as criminals. And then actually looked into the root cause of how to, handing out needles, clean needles, and support, and offering support, essentially. And that was back in the 80s. And I mean, 2001, I think it was 2001 when they actually decriminalized all drugs. And you just have to look at what they've done there, and how that's, how society has benefited from it. There's a great article actually, which would be great if we could put it in the description. But there's a Guardian article that from 2017, which literally talks about this guy Alvaro Pereira and the impact that the decriminalisation of all drugs has had on their society. And they're probably the most progressive government in the world when it comes to law reform, and no one does heroin anymore. For a start. So yeah, I mean, and Holland, obviously, in the Netherlands, was another great success story, bringing the average age of heroin addicts from 18, 19 up to 45, 50, and then it's had a huge impact as well. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously they're two quite different approaches. So the Netherlands technically, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the Dutch word that has just flashed before my head. Basically means a look the other way. So their policy has been to look the other way on soft drugs. Whereas, as you say, Portugal in 2001 put it into statute. They made it law. One of the issues that I've always had around the argument of decrim versus legalization has been supply. That still in Portugal now, if you are still a heroin user, there's still not that many. In fact, I don't even think there's any operational injection sites that will give you pure diamorphine, that will give you clean registered heroin. You still have to find it yourself, and that is still then supporting an illicit market. So in the same way that the argument that was made in America about economics for legalizing is now being made, for example, in Bolivia. So they've just done a cash calculation that says actually it's costing us 1.6 billion a year to eradicate coca crops. If we paid the market rate for it, it would cost us 1.2 billion, and we'd have no crime. So they're seriously looking into doing that. So I think that there is something to be said for, as Ash was alluding to earlier, maybe a nationalized model of this, where if the drugs are then controlled by the government in terms of purity, in terms of then abuse or usage by the citizens, that then has to be titrated socially. That's most definitely not a criminal.
And also in this country, in a lot of, not like the States where essentially the prison system is monetized and it's a profit-making machine. So, it costs a lot of money to lock people up in this country. It's in our interest not to do so, and to actually use that money they would spend on prisoners to educate people and provide them with other stuff to do,
We got a lot. There's a lot of things kind of going on here. I mean, the first thing is, okay, everybody does drugs at some point. Everybody has a toot. Everybody has a spoon. Everybody has a spoon. Everyone loves a spoon.
Not everybody has a spoon.
No, I'm joking. No, but the point is that like everybody will try drugs at some point in their life. Some people have a very complicated relationship with drugs, and in terms of becoming dependent, Gav, we need to start using the word dependent, not addict. The drug dependent, not addict.
It depends. It depends what drugs, right?
It's dependent.
No. Addict is not. This is the thing, because
I will take your word from it. As a drug dependent that you are, I'll take your word from it.
Yeah, as a drug dependent that I am. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, why do people stay on drugs? Yeah, you go to the pint. You go to the pub. Everyone goes to the pub for a pint. But what's the difference between you and the guy that has to be kicked out at the end of the night?
Well,
it's the same. Those are the. Yeah, it's the same. These are the same kind of things, and different drugs have these different effects on different people. The majority of adults, and there's 3 studies that I was looking at The majority of adult males surveyed in, I think, 3 different studies, 1 in the Netherlands, 2 in America, had suffered PTSD. That's adult dependent cannabis males had suffered PTSD as a child. The rate of sexual abuse as a child, the rate of PTSD experienced by a child, is a great predictor for drug dependence in later age. I mean, I can talk. I'm more than happy to talk about my own personal kind of struggles with depression.
Well, we haven't got that long yet.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks, mate. Right. See, this is what I had to work with for 4 years.
That's a separate podcast, yeah.
But essentially, again, we travel when we're analysing my cannabis use, there is a direct line to trauma that I suffered as a child and the inability to self-soothe as an adult. Even as a teenager, I got bullied relentlessly in school. I was just a weird kid. I had a lot of weird stuff happen to me as a kid. I was, beaten up by one of my headmasters when I was in primary school. Like loads of weird little things like that.
What had you been doing?
Hey,
what had you been
being
doing?
5 years old.
Well, that'll learn you.
Yeah. And so. Yeah, like it's those little things like that kind of, combine over the years.
Accumulate.
PTSD that just, and so that's the first thing that we have to look at. Like, why are people staying on drugs? Why are people? So will that market that we're looking at, is that going to be elastic? If, for example, we increase welfare payments, if we ensure that every child has food, if we don't have child poverty is one of the most damaging things. Like having, like, this is the thing, like we've all had, like, when you as a child seeing poverty, as a child seeing, like, your parents struggle, as seeing your parents be traumatized by their living conditions, that is self-traumatizing as well. You get rid of that. Let's see what happens like further down the line when we're looking at Portugal. Again, like, we have to look at like what welfare measures have been put in place, and again, like Portuguese politics is crazy, but they are doing a better job. Yeah, they're not encouraging an illicit underground of drugs, but again, like, do you, like, my whole kind of thing about a fully legalized drug market is that it feels like you're waving the white flag to society, the fact that society could be better, that you're saying that, okay, what's happening right now, this is as good as society is going to get. So here's all the things that you need to be able to cope with it.
Sure. But also clubbing all drugs together, which is what they've always done.
That's
I mean, if you look at for instance, the argument about gateway drugs. Like, for me, cannabis was a gateway drug to tobacco, because I was never going to smoke cigarettes.
Same. Exactly.
I now in my life as a 43-year-old guy, I still am clucking to go and have a joint now, and that's purely because of the tobacco. And if it wasn't for tobacco, I could take cannabis as and when, whatever. But when it comes to 5 p.m, I desperately, all I can think about is having a joint, and I know a lot of that has to do with the tobacco. Now, if at the time when I've been growing up, there'd been more information about it, and people had vaporizers, and people had smoking pure whatever, then I wouldn't have that. I wouldn't be addicted to the worst drug that there is, which is or the worst legal drug there is, which is tobacco. And that's the gateway drug. It also, when you figure out that they've been lying and bullshitting you about cannabis and then about mushrooms, then naturally, it's human nature to then want to try other things. Okay, I didn't try heroin, I didn't try whatever else, but if I'd been from a different upbringing, then I might well have gone onto it, because you realise they're bullshitting you about the softer drugs.
I mean, with the harder drugs, again, like the gateway for harder drugs usually comes from your access point. Like, if your access point and also your setting where you're doing like those drugs. And I think the same goes for like alcoholism and harder drugs. I've got a lot of friends in Europe. We've got a lot of friends in Italy, a lot of friends in parts of Italy that, said serious heroin problems. And the majority of those people got onto heroin just simply because they were hanging out with other people who were doing it. They got given, they got given rap, they got given whatever. But the underlying motivating factors that kind of push them towards that, domestic violence, family alcoholism, zero employment opportunities, all of these things, right? Cannabis can help you cope. Cannabis can help you cope with all of those things. And it's something I was thinking about tonight when people, the old thing that people talk about, oh yeah, cannabis makes you lazy, but doesn't make you. No, that's what cannabis does, is it makes you cope and it makes you resilient, and it puts your mind into almost like this psychic shell.
But it also does different things to different people and different strengths to different people. It's very complex, but for you, yeah.
But I'm saying, in terms of, for example, the programs that it's used in anxiety and depression and PTSD, it gives you this it helps give you this mental shell, and it helps you, but it doesn't, but this is the thing, like it also, that shell's, it's a two-way wall, because sometimes, and this is again something that I've experienced myself, and I'm talking completely again from my own experience, like trying to move through that shell, trying to move out of your circle can sometimes be really scary, because you've now developed this circle, this little moat around yourself, like this is my land, this is my area, I'm safe in here doing this kind of work. And stepping out of that comfort circle can bring on anxiety, because you've may have strengthened I say probably some negative behavior. However, because you're taking cannabis, you cope, and it's not a problem. And that's I feel that's very, very different to it being considered something that makes you lazy. It makes you cope, and it makes you cope and
We have to,
as Bill Hicks pointed out, it just makes you realise that it's not worth the fucking effort anyway.
Exactly.
Sorry, I was just going to say, because obviously cannabis consumption we know causes metacognition and personal introspection. So although, yes, as you say, it can unintentionally help form and strengthen maladaptive behaviors that could be negative in the long run, it can also then give you the insight to identify it. Do you know what I mean? And then there is a huge thing I see all the time in people who can only get access to one dealer, so they buy the weed that guy sells. So for a month they're buying the same thing, and they end up in a depressive state. And then suddenly the cultivar changes that's in supply, and the woof. And they're in a different mindset, and they don't even clock to what it is that they were consuming. They're susceptible to certain terpene, flavonoid, and cannabinoid combinations. And without that base education, that's true in cannabis, but there's also other mechanisms that we're only just beginning to understand, because we're removing the veil of stigma from other substances. So obviously, as we spoke earlier about them doing tests with LSD and whatnot, we're now approaching some serious testing with psilocybin, with MDMA. There's even studies cross and co-drug consumption, so they're taking polydrug use, so it's multiple drugs, and measuring the effects. Obviously, with those classic chemical drugs, they're a bit more predictable, I suppose. So we can build better procedures. And I agree to a certain extent of what you're saying about waving the white flag of going, well, this is shit, here's a way to make you personally get through it. I think on the other side of it, that as the moralizing and the stigma drops away, the culture is evolving naturally. The drugs would become available, and then the availability of the drugs, the fear of people pacifying themselves or finding the lock that fits their key because of their trauma, it doesn't then become a negative life of dependency. It could then become an amplifier, in the same way that we look at a vitamin. If you've got a vitamin deficiency, once we truly get to these things, I mean, I've known, and most people listening to this will know, functional dependent people of all substances, that they look at it and go, Jesus Christ, you have 4 bags of heroin a day, and look at you clean every day, you've still got a job, you're still this, you're still, you know what I mean? And then we obviously know on the other side of the spectrum, too. The difference there is usually the stigma that they face is usually they get pushed further down into that system, and it's the idea of, you got to hit rock bottom before we can help you. When actually, if we could meet people where the fuck they are, and if we had this individualized therapy, so basically, if you went, I'm dependent on my substance, you went to your GP, they went, right, Let's look at your life. What's going on? What traumas you faced? Build a plan around you. Don't push for sobriety. Give you access to the cleanest of your substance. And if we built communities the same way that we have now with the medical cannabis community that are building of, say, people with fibro talking to each other about different cultivars, preparations, we have the same in these other communities. And the very nature of that community is the connection that most people who are dependent on substances are seeking. That connection to that drug gives them this sense of self or a sense of belonging in the universe. It's a little voice whispering in their ear that it's okay. Whereas we could then change that drug if they chose to, and they were brave enough to and wanted to, with a community of people that would accept them for who they are and not go, you were on the streets for 5 years injecting drugs, you stole from grannies, you blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? People who would just go, I see you, my fellow man, you pained human. Do you know what I mean? If we could have that across the communities, not just heroin for heroin users, you know what I mean? If we could actually have the cannabis community stop saying smackheads and crackheads and talking derisively about other drug consumers, while then still fighting and going, well, you shouldn't talk that way about cannabis, it's just a plant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So the language is extremely important, you know, and particularly, I mean, in this article I mentioned about Portugal, the first thing they were seeking to change was the language and how people actually refer to and talk about junkies or whatever it is, and as opposed to drug addicts or people, they changed it to people that use drugs, you know. So it's, you know, it goes very much right back to the language and the basics around that, you know. It's really how our attitudes towards it, you know.
Yeah. We have a see, I'm convinced on a slightly lighter note but relatable one that anybody that complains about the smell of cannabis is just reciting some psychosomatic fucking nonsense. Do you know what I mean? That it's something that they think they don't like because they've been told they don't fucking like it. Do you know that kind of way? How can you not like it? It's one of the best fucking smells ever. What the fuck?
It is. No, I mean, I heard someone talk about that on the radio the other day. I mean, the point I would add to that is if I was sitting in an office in London and a load of weed came through the window, all I could then think about for the rest of the day was smoking weed. But this does smell lovely. It smells beautiful.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah,
we're not functional, like, do you know what I mean? Now, another small little point there as well is like that sort of surface level dismissal that you get even from, say, not single use, but one time only cannabis users that have made up their mind and go, fuck me, that's fucked up, that's all crazy, nah, I'll stick to my beers, the 16 that you've had before you've had the fucking joint, the puff off
exactly,
the joint.
Yeah. Mushrooms the same.
Yeah,
mushrooms,
but I mean, but like, I mean, if that's sort of the depth that's protruding through society, do you know what I mean? We've got a lot more work to fucking do. I had another bit to that point there, but I lost it. Yeah.
Education. If it's drilled into you the first time you're going to try weed, make sure you haven't drunk 5 pints beforehand, then you'd have a very different experience with it.
This is true.
Again, we're back to our practices and our view of cannabis. Are we just consuming it like we consume beer? When you have too much beer, your head spins. When you have like that certain amount of cannabis, like you start to see yourself. You start like the paranoia, right? If there's one thing that I realized, and it's since I had my psychedelic assisted therapy, and integration circles, like since then, when I've looked back on my greatest paranoias, my greatest noise, like, I feel like that was a bad trip, right? That's a bad trip on like, and when you're tripping on psychedelics and you have a bad trip, that's your psyche telling you something, or you facing one part of your psyche that is either a trauma, an insecurity, or whatever, and how you deal with it in that moment, whether you fight against what is essentially yourself in either a violent way or you treat it with compassion, which is the way you should do. But that in that moment, you face yourself. And looking back on my paranoias from when I was younger, smoking cannabis, and even the paranoias that I have now and the anxieties, they're all related to how I see myself. And they're all related to my anxieties, and they're all related to things that I need to work on myself.
100%.
Like, are people talking about me? Why are people talking about me? Why should I care about that? Where does that come from? And again, it's like, beer doesn't let you address yourself. Cannabis, I think, on some level can.
Cannabis is almost a mirror. It's kind of good. It's good to hold yourself to an account, but that's what beer does, is the complete opposite. It lets you completely ignore how you're behaving.
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of the structure of it, alcohol is classed as a neurological retardant because it slows down connection between neurons. Cannabis actually causes, what do they call it? New neurological pathways to develop in the brain. I can't remember what the term is called for it, but basically it increases the functionality of the brain. To some people, as you've alluded to there, that can be very difficult for them. Their first experience, if they've gone through their life only ever listening to their base ego. So as Freud spoke of the ego, the superego, and the id. So the most states of consciousness, as the Buddha speaks to, or even Jesus spoke of, about witnessing yourself, being witness to yourself, and talking to yourself. That's not crazy. Yeah. Some people have never done that, and then they have a small puff of weed at a festival or whatever somewhere after maybe even not a few beers, just on an empty stomach after a long exhausting day in the sun, and they have an experience where they hear their own voice, and instead of them going and listening, they get scared by it, and the harder you then push against it, the worse it becomes. Do you know what I mean? Because it is your conscience.
It also goes back, Simpa, doesn't it, to whether the government actually wants society to be full of kind of thoughtful, self-reflecting people,
Indeed.
Or if they want you to go and have 5 beers and then just not question everything. I mean,
there's a reason there's a sale for alcohol every bank holiday. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
they
get
don't
a
want
litre of fucking whiskey for 15 fucking quid. And there you go. You've got 3 days. You've got an extra day to recover. Don't think about your fucking job.
But that's exactly.
There's something there with with the booze, with the alcohol, with being able to take a trip, and there's this element of mentorship that I don't think people that we take for granted. Like the first person who gave you your first joint, the first person who told you about whitening out, like how to get yourself back on your feet. Like for me, how to roll with a bad trip, for example, like literally lie on your back and breathe and feel your breath inside of you, all that kind of hippie stuff to help you reconnect. But I wouldn't have known any of those things if in some of my times of crisis, times of psychedelic emergencies or cannabis emergencies or whatever, there wasn't somebody there to help me, somebody educated, somebody that I could trust, as opposed to a bunch of my mates pissing themselves on the other side of the party or whatever we're at, while I'm like
sorry about that.
Gav, it happens a lot, doesn't it, mate? It happens a lot. But honestly, that's the thing, especially when we do drugs as kids, we're all I would actually be, I mean, when I don't know, the difference in that is when a bunch of kids do MD and you just see them all cuddling each other in in some cuddle puddle in Boomtown or something like that. That's beautiful. Yeah. And then you see a few doors down, somebody spooned out their head, absolutely, dribbling on dribbling in a corner or in the middle of a castle or something. But there's a time and a place, and one of the things I feel that especially our young kids are missing are actual people to respect and to invest some thought into, and instead we've got cut price right-wing alt-right grifters bloody Ben Shapiro or
you know why that is though, Ash? They're all in fucking prison. They're literally though. Where are the social leaders? Where are the community healers? Where are the actual people that tried to do something and step beyond that legal bound to step up for their community? They were arrested and destroyed. So what happens? You then vilify that entire family. So then they become opposed to the very people that are there to protect that community, and then that just becomes this ever expanding arms race, as Neil would speak of. So that now you end up with the people that I live with in Durham, one of the worst estates in Durham, which is still, I think, ranked the 3rd most impoverished region in Northern Europe. The police are their enemy, the absolute fucking enemy. I have been in meetings with the cops where they've rolled out a map in this area and gone, we get info for wherever except these 2 dead hotspots, which is the main bull rings around here. Some of these guys are 3rd and 4th generation unemployed. All they've got is dealing. That is their only opportunity. You know what I mean? The culture and the community that they've grown up in that was created as a consequence of prohibition has dampened them. Yet there's still some wonderful, creative, beautiful fucking people. They may look rough, speak rough, and have nothing to them in terms of finances or whatever, but they shouldn't discount them. You know what I mean? It's as Gav said before, it's the government, or rather the powers that be, that put various people into positions of political power. They don't want a well-informed, compassionate community. They don't want people that are going to recognize the pain of others, because then that's an anathema to capitalism. Because capitalism is designed on you will get ahead if you step on the rest. Do you know what I mean? And the more that people take MDMA and they then go, I mean, because I've seen it. I have grown up with kids that were racist, fascist, horrible fuckers. Start going to the rave scene and start taking MDMA, and then they're cuddling on the biggest black guy that you've ever seen in the world, going from times where they'd go fight him just because of the color of his skin. And now they felt this reversal of things have gone and had gone over and deburdened themselves, as it were, and tried to make up for years of feeling this certain way because they've grown up in isolation. The rave communities that grew up before me and the generation ahead of me and that we grew up in the shadow of really did far more for community cohesion than any policing around drugs could ever do, than any of these community initiatives or projects run by health workers or whatever else. Until we have an acceptance that we have the right to act and do what we want as long as we're not harming each other, and the right to build our communities as we see fit, then we're going to keep having these same fucking problems, and each generation is going to get worse because they'll keep losing their leaders, losing their idols, do you know?
Like on that point of like, I mean, you mentioned something there that I felt was, like kind of blind. I think something along the lines of blind consumption of cannabis, such as of drugs in general. And I just wondered, like, whether you felt that was, because it's something that I kind of feel when I look at like some of the cannabis trade shows that we go to, that there's this. I mean, because that's the thing. We're going to a trade show. It's there for it's there for the trade. It's there for the money. But it, especially, I mean, when I, compare it to, say, a tech trade show, or I compare it to, video games trade show, or, E3 or something like that, it was really like kind of geared towards like, just consume as much weed as possible. A lot of the media that's being, the popular media on YouTube, like you've got, dude, like smokes a 10-gram dab or something like that.
There is no.
And you know what I mean? So there's part of that I feel that is already being co-opted, like in America, like in terms of how people want to, smoke weed and whatnot. And like the idea of, smoking a massive fucking, weed cigar and kind of thing, that's a sign of respect. Like, I don't know.
It's a sign of affluence. In a country, though, where it's legal and you've got branding and advertising, of course, come on, as an influencer, I mean, when I was really doing my lives every week, I wasn't paying for shit. Do you know what I mean? I really wasn't paying for goddamn it. And I did not have the biggest of reach. In America, where these people have channels over 1 million plus, think about it, as we spoke of earlier around capitalism under the neoliberalistic model means you need quarterly growth. In an industry like cannabis, there's going to be a finite point. So when you reach every consumer that you can, you then need to incentivize that consumer to consume as much as possible.
Also, the US is leading the way in terms of cannabis, and the US has always been about the worship of money anyway. So in whatever industry it's about, it's going to be glamorizing it.
Yeah, but I think ultimately it will settle. I think there will unfortunately be consequences and problems. But if we can set up a social equity model where we take, say, a quarter of the profits that are made from this that go into paying reparations for people that were imprisoned or people whose lives were ruined, and to rebuilding the very communities that were worst hit by prohibition, you then take another chunk of it and you invest that into education, into research, into an open, as Maka keeps talking about, an open source technology base where all of the data is inputted so everybody has free access to all of it. So there is no hiding of research by various pharmaceutical companies until they get their patent, and they can corner the market on various cannabinoid research. And again, there's still then more than enough for everyone to live off. I mean, the industry at the minute is still trying to inflate the price of weed. If we really want to get this fucking right, we need to crash it. Do you know what I mean? The price of us smoking it should be so cheap. It shouldn't be about pricing us out of consuming it. It should be creating a social etiquette the same way we do with pubs. Yeah. So if you're down the pub, most publicans and most regulars, if they then see somebody that's having too much, publican will clock them, cut them off. Mates should be like, "You all right, dude? How are you doing?" And there's they're looking after them in a social capacity. Whereas in an illegal market of people taking drugs, there isn't that mechanism. So I think that the more we have of these things and the more we have these social spaces of clubs or coffee shops or whatever, people can socially titrate their own. And there's a way then we can recognize problematic consumption. And then through a voluntary system, people can then still have access to not abstinence-based recovery, not forced sobriety, because that I do not believe in any capacity that is the fucking answer. You have to figure out, as we've alluded to on this podcast earlier, why the trauma, as Gabor Marty asks, not why the trauma, not the addiction. And until we reframe that debate, we can have that kind of discussion. Then the multinational investment firms that are pushing legalization in this country, because they are the same people that shouted at us and said, you will never grow your own and you will never get a recreational market in the UK, and are the ones leading the way for the recreational charge coming into 2021. So it's an interesting position. I have said quite a lot that I'm probably going to be in the unfortunate position of fighting against legalization in the coming year or so, because it's going to be unbelievably corporatized, and it will actually create in Canada more laws for them to come after us, more nuance within the legislation for them to attack us, more impediments to us getting licenses or access to play.
Sure, but if cannabis is legalized, but it's also highly regulated, so on and so forth, how are they going to be able to justify actually busting you for growing 5 plants in your cupboard if they've actually held their hands up and said, yes, these are all the benefits? So there is that
same way that,
but we need precedent.
You get busted for making vodka in your house. Like, you're not allowed to distill spirits. Like, you can buy vodka, but you can't make it at home without a license.
Well, you can make gin in your garage. Surely you can, can't you?
Yeah,
I better go and smash up my distillery then. Oh, not for sale.
I think it can be like, up to 20% or something like that. But these highly distilled spirits, we've got all of these products like, there are tons of products. You can't grow codeine. You can buy codeine. You can't grow it at home because it's bloody opium, isn't it? Like, there are so many. There's like, Transform have got their 5 different models of legalization, of rather kind of market regulation, as it were. They all look really cool. Like, some of them are like, you've got your pharmacy led, you've got your shop led, you've got your full legalization. And again, that full legalization, I think, is opening a Pandora's box of, literally you're going to have the Coca-Cola. You've already got Nestle in Canada. Did you see my post the other week? Nestle is in cannabis. Nestle is in cannabis.
It's done.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's over. Cannabis is, once Nestle is in cannabis, cannabis is over.
No, but this is wonderful. So all of the people at the corporate trade show, everybody on every level that isn't going to be one of the already existing drinks manufacturers, food manufacturers, or major international agriculturists, you are going to get locked the fuck out. So you may make your money now and get whatever, but when this comes, whatever form of global legalization takes place, there will still be a fucking movement of people going, you're wrong. We need entirely this to be fully, truly, ubiquitously decriminalized. Yeah. So that means no prison for cultivating a one too many plant, or in Canada, for example, growing using the wrong seeds, which is then illegal. You know what I mean? There are so many different ways that they can tie us up that we will always be beholden to them. And again, as you first opened this podcast with speaking of the black people in America that had got their liberty, that then had this opportunity to set themselves free, were tied up in economic legislation and everything else that came along with it to then prevent them from doing so. And I fear that they are literally giving us, as a way of pacifying us, his legal cannabis. Well, and we then smoke, as you said, as much as we like, get all the dabs in the world. We're all taking 1,000 milligram edible every day, and nobody's thinking about the consequences or truly fighting for this. They've managed to weaponize what we want against us.
You only have to look at Monsanto to see how dangerous it is when nature is essentially owned and controlled, and again, Monsanto getting hold of cannabis.
Yeah, that comes back to I think the problem with having the cannabis movement as is based on a purely consumptive act. Like the entire thing about making it like something that is both belonging to social justice, that's belonging to law reform, that's belonging to the upliftment of material conditions of the working class. These are actual things, rather than, oh yeah, we should all be able to have a smoke in peace. Yes, you should be able to have a smoke in peace, but it's much more politically compelling to tell somebody that you can completely redevelop Northumberland by growing like cannabis on a 3 square mile patch, or something like that. I'm being hyperbolic there, but on the Nestle thing, guys, like in case like your listeners don't know, like there's essentially the brand is Geocan, and it's ultra. Oh bloody hell, where's it gone now? I took a picture of it and it's on the THTC Instagram page. But it is called Ulteri. Oh, bullocks. Gav, look it up. But essentially what they've done is they've combined like CBD with fish oil there. And what is their IP that they've got around this is the capsule lining. It's called something called Vesisorb, which basically means that it gets into your gut a lot quicker, and you've got a lot more cannabis that's bioavailable, or whatever nonsense that they're saying.
Yeah, it's the Minami stuff, right? Minami.
It comes in really insidiously, because my girlfriend came back from working the market, and apparently like you had all these like influencer types and market reps going around the markets, basically giving out these samples to people, to restaurant owners and things, so they could like just sell this stuff, which is classed as a nutritional supplement. Again, like something that again is so like it's this whole CBD novel food regulation is just an absolute like head fuck.
But that shows what happens when research doesn't lead and greed does.
Yeah. But here we go, like Nestle's making cannabis, guys. Like, I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like, if you're going full legalization, you're gonna have Coca-Cola making cannabis drinks. You're gonna have Nestle making nutritional supplements. You're gonna have all of that, and then people will say, oh, just don't buy it then.
Yeah, you'll also have Primark making hemp viscose as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is the problem. It needs to come. We can't just say we're going to legalize cannabis. It has to be paired with social justice. It has to be paired with all of these other important.
Entirely, but there also
national repair. That could be our slogan: national repair and self-sufficiency. Is there an?
That's great. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's tangible and that's beautiful.
Like, and in something like that, if we did something like that and we created a nationalized industry, because look, I mean, we were talking about Portugal earlier. So there is a slight conspiracy theory on the internet that is somewhat backed up, that suggests that it was executives from the parent company, the investment firm Venture Group, who are the owners of Tilray.
Oh yeah, I know those guys.
Whatever else, yeah. So they were behind Portugal's decision to not push for the vote to fully legalize cannabis. Within a few weeks, there was an announcement that a 28 million euro facility was to be opened in Portugal for Tilray to service European facilities. So the issue we've got is that these organizations, these companies are that large now that they can sway influence around other governments. So we have to push this nationalized thing. We have to push this. So I think the way, and it's something we've spoke of quite a lot on this podcast, is that we first need to reform and standardize the language, because what one person hears when they hear decriminalize and one person hears legalize, they're different things. So in the loose term that I used, I meant legalize as in there are no punitive measures you can face for what you did with cannabis, unless say you compact it into a brick and beat somebody to death with it, then that's an act of violence. You assaulted them with cannabis, it's not the cannabis that's the charge. You know what I mean? So whereas some people hear that and they hear obviously corporate and they hear marketed and like we say quarterly growth and like Dan Bilzerian's marketing and all that shit, they see that kind of end product, which in some parts of the world, they're not even attempting to regulate it because the money is that fucking big. They all cashed in at the right goddamn time. They've got their stock in these companies. they're happy. They're happy. Whereas we have an opportunity in this country to have a true grassroots movement that represents the hemp and CBD industry, that represents the medical cannabis industry, that represents so-called recreational or adult consumption, and the actual general fucking public that would benefit from this. The 40,000 extra deaths, I think it's in London alone, from pollution, that could be helped benefit by using the best natural carbon sequestration technology on the planet. Do you know what I mean? You were talking about wealth inequality. There's 14.5 million people in poverty in this country. We could put them back to work, because at this point, we're still going to need many hands make look like work. We could literally have a true Green New Deal where we rebuild a renewable world using cannabis as the base resource for this. We could become a world leader in the research of technology. There's cannabis graphene, for fuck's sake, which that's in quantum computing and supercapacitor batteries that are more effective than a lithium cell. You know what I mean? Once we start talking about that sort of stuff, we're still talking about, the smell of it, and it gets you a bit high and a bit... We're still stuck down here when Star Trek fucking future is over there. And we have the opportunity as a country to lead that, to truly do it. If we've decided to cut ourselves off from the rest of the world and we can go it alone, this is the resource that gives us it. But it has to be a free and open industry that's not being bought from companies buying into this country, but from the people building it and generating our own profit and developing our own trade relations with the world around our technologies. Because as I said earlier, China are fucking doing it. They are moving far ahead of this. And if we don't catch up, this is all going to be private from America and China. They will close in the world until corporate cannabis enslaves us all.
Good speech.
Thank you.
That's good at that, you know.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. So I should try and do it for a living one time. Trying. I want to get two more questions for you guys, because I'm aware I've kept you slightly longer than I did say I would have you. As we've just been talking about legalization, would you ever consider becoming the cannabis trade company?
THTC. After 21 years of trying to get THTC to into people's heads and mindsets, I think it might be a little trying to rebrand the name now. Probably not. But also, we need to remember if hemp and cannabis are synonymous with one another, people need to remember and learn the history of it. So, no, I mean, we're the hemp trading company. And to be honest, when we first started, every other hemp company that I looked at was linking hemp and cannabis, as in the smoking side of cannabis, together, which is something that I tried to separate purely because trying to be taken seriously 20 years ago, in the press, straight away they're going to tie you with a brush of, you must be a bunch of stoners. So it was intentional to try and disassociate the two, all being that we did it through drum and bass and hip hop nights, but they will always try and tie whatever you do in the hemp scene in with, you must be getting stoned. And so, it was intentional to try and disassociate the two. Especially bearing in mind that hemp and cannabis, the other question you'd asked earlier, which I thought was very interesting, was you asked about the difference between cannabis and hemp. Most people would still use the word marijuana, and it's a racist word, and I'm really glad that the connotations of that are slowly disappearing, because it was only Ernest Small who came up with a totally arbitrary number back in 1979 when he wrote The Species Problem in Cannabis, and it was just purely then that he came up with 0.3% of THC being present in hemp, which turned it into marijuana or cannabis. It's a completely arbitrary number, but they are obviously the same family, they're the same plants, but people still tie them all together. It's just a natural, the press does anyway, it's just a natural thing for them to do. So I think they are two different things, and they should be treated as such as well.
Yeah, it was the only reason I sort of ask is I've been sort of on a personal grudge against the difference, or the arbitrary difference between them. Obviously, there are difference in the etymology in terms of the root of the words. Not going to get into now because that's far too long. It'll go into, but and then there's obviously the difference in terms of the colloquialistic way we use them, the way we use them in our common vocabulary. And I think more needs, as we said about the standardization of language, to be a discernible difference, because they're too easily interchanged. When what I put forward was the idea if we kind of use hemp as an archaic term that still carries forward, but we say industrial cannabis, or the industrial properties of cannabis, because obviously the plant species itself isn't hemp. In the Latin name is cannabis. So if we're then trying to standardize the education, I mean, even in, say, America, Canada, they call cannabinoids CBDs. So when you're reading cross literature of the Americans and the Canadians, it can get very fucking confusing. There's other instances of this where there's not that standard terminology, so it's very hard to take it in from all of these regions and put it into a standardized thing that the average layman can read. So I think that, yeah, there should be something around that. And the only reason I rebel against it is I feel it's slightly disingenuous for the hemp lobby, for lack of a better wording, to kind of go, we're not cannabis. We only have a tiny amount of that devil THC in it. Leave us alone. And it's like, well, actually, if we had a thriving THC-rich crop, the fibers in cannabis is in higher than 0.3 THC, are denser. Do you know what I mean? There are certain cultivars, and God, when we can actually be allowed to interbreed these things like hell, we'll be able to create some 17-foot tall monsters that give flowers like cars. It's a shit analogy, but you know what I'm saying is once we truly lift that cap and actually allow the education to be spread between all sides, we can learn from this rather than a pharmaceutical company patenting how they can add 50% to their yield of their crop for their own profit, and the hemp farmer struggling to get it for the resource that we need to sequester that carbon, to renutrify that soil, to produce the building materials to build the new homes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, this is the difference between incrementalism and making actual radical change. And I think the problem that I know that you're talking about is essentially when you have a group of businesses that all have they've all got their own financial interests, but they essentially have them in such a certain way that if you start to try and punch above your weight, you're going to jeopardize the very little that you've got there. And hemp sellers in this country, as far as I know, well, from our shared experience, live in a very precarious state. They live in such a precarious state. When you are pulling support or trying to get some kind of unionization from or kind of collective kind of effort from those people, they're always going to be limited by anything they see as a threat to their current kind of income and their current living standards, and that you can't blame them for that, because these are people that have got their houses, their mortgages rely on these businesses. So this is why I'm saying that maybe we need to start to decouple this argument from purely product based and start focusing on these social issues and coupling them more, and coupling them a lot tighter with the with the cannabis thing, because even there I think with hemp textiles we can sorry, I'm getting text from Evie's just going, I'm hungry, I need to eat. I'm babbling anyway now.
She can look after herself, can't she? Does she need you to cook for her?
I don't eat without my girlfriend. You guys eat without your girlfriend?
Yeah,
absolutely not.
If we can wrap up and just hit the last question there, Simpa, because I'm going to have to. I haven't eaten since breakfast.
This has been a pleasure, and honestly, I'm grateful for you both for giving me the time. We'll obviously have you on again in the near future. But the last question I wanted to ask you really was, what does the near future, distant future? I suppose we'll talk about near future because nobody has a clue what's going on.
Near future,
thanks to COVID.
Yeah, optimistic.
With what's the future of THTC?
Well, the future. The last year has obviously just been a complete write-off. So when Ash went to get a better job last year, I made the decision to try to take a sabbatical this year, and we shut the warehouse, shut the office, and I stopped buying stock because after 20 years, I really, really needed a break and needed to reassess. So I was going to just go into private label B2B hemp products and then go on tour with UB40 last year, which was the plan. But then obviously life and fun and business were all cancelled. So since then, I started doing some masks. So I did some masks working with the Refugee Community Kitchen for those, purely not because I wanted to profit off of COVID, but because of walking down the street and seeing all the disposable throwaway crap and everything appearing in the ocean and everything else. So we got into that. Towards the end of last year, I started working with a company called T-Mill, who do all of our prints now on print to order, organic cotton, T-shirts, hoodies, everything else, whilst trying to keep private label going on. So I've actually produced a hemp t-shirt ranges for 4 or 5 other hemp brands, which are just hemp and CBD brands, which are popping up. One's called Sundial Hemp, another one's called Trippy Panther. Oh God, the others will come to me. The Hemp Shop, right, and a couple of others. But really getting into doing more private label stuff for all the, not just hemp and cannabis brands, but any brands that want to do more sustainable eco merch. So as from this year, I'm going into business with Seedsman, who are a British company, but a Spanish seeds bank. And they're going to be providing me with staff, warehouse, some finance and some funding in order to do that. But I really, really want to focus on more hemp basics. So hemp caps, t-shirts, socks, beanies, anything like that for other brands to be able to put their logo on. I mean, nothing breaks my heart more than going to a hemp cannabis trade show and wandering around and seeing all of the seed banks selling, Gildan t-shirts with their print on them. Yeah. So every more accessible to everyone to be able to buy 10, 20, 50, 100 hemp t-shirts and put their brand name on it.
Yeah.
So hemp basics, really.
Excellent.
That's very much. And we're also doing heavier weights. We've got some lovely hemp towels as well.
Ooh, they look cool, man.
Yeah, really, really nice fabric. There's certain things that hemp lends itself really, really well to, and they are things like socks, towels, things that you want to last forever, So yeah, I've banged on for a long time about these hemp socks, but the socks is where it's at. So I have a big range of hemp socks coming out very soon. Unfortunately, they're all going to be finished and sent before Chinese New Year. But I got a message yesterday saying China's just gone back into lockdown, so everything is paused again. All of the business is all on pause. So hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. But for now, who knows?
I'd say I quite like the musical connection as well. Definitely want to see a lot more sort of UK based artists as well. I've seen you've got Red Meth and stuff like that, and that's fucking cool. That is really fucking cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I mean, really, we've got a few US and big international names, but we've really always focused for 2 decades on really trying to help promote the UK scene, and the more local scene, and particularly beatbox. I mean, we're founding members of the or initial sponsors of the UK Beatbox Champs 15 years ago, and now beatbox has become a massive international phenomenon. So yeah, trying to support local artists is kind of one of the things that we got into.
I mean, one of the things that Gav will never say himself is that the majority of our partnerships are a result of people just being friends with him and being just because Gav is a good person. People come and they work with Gav because he's a dude, and they work with me because they like me mostly. That's the thing. People just little things like this. A business isn't just some amorphous. It shouldn't really be some amorphous kind of brand that kind of sits like some kind of ivory tower in the distance, shining away. It's it's hard work. It's one guy who's single-handedly run a company for a few years, then joined by, a small brown man who, rode the shirt tails of glory for a good couple of years. I did leave that, I left THTC last year to go and work at a digital creative agency because sadly my personal money situation and also wanting to buy a house this side of being 40 years old, there's some things you got to do, but I mean, this is the thing. I give a fair bit of my time to running THTC on socials. One of the things that when Gav gave me the announcement to post up when we started making the content for it, saying, "Hey guys, this is probably going to be our last sale, and then we're just going to run down the stock." The absolute outpouring of affection and love, from people, you guys, if anyone's been on the THTC Facebook page, they'll notice, an often kind of argumentative tone with racists and climate change denialists and conspiracy theorists and whatnot. But the beauty of some of the comments and commenters on our page, we'll run into them at festivals. They'll come up to us and they'll cuddle us and they'll, you know, give us presents. And it's incredibly humbling. Like, it's incredibly humbling, especially to see like something like, especially, you know, like coming up and just seeing somebody who's wearing a THTC t-shirt that like says, oh yeah, I know Gav. I remember Gav from all the way back. I met him like once at a festival, like once at here, or did something like that. Or they just know us and they know our tone and they know who we are and they like us. And one of the things that it's like, you know, this little, where is it? Where we go? Our little logo, like 99% of the time, when you see this like t-shirt, this logo on another person, like they're going to be a good person to talk to. They're always going to have something decent to say, and you've always got a friend in that person. Like, and that is testament to Gav building that. Like, it's a mate's. It's a
thank you, man.
And yeah,
thank you, man. I do appreciate that. One thing I would say, which I really don't take for granted, is that environmentalism, particularly, you're trying to run your own environmental business, trying to run your business full stop, but trying to run an environmental business, encourage people to save the world. Environmentalism is still a middle class issue. And I say that because people that are struggling to put food on the table every day or clothes on their kids' backs don't have the luxury to be able to say, oh, why don't you go and buy something free range? Why don't you buy something that's going to last longer but is more expensive? Most people are just struggling to get by. So, you know, I do very much appreciate that. I've been able to do this for many years because I'm very lucky to not have the outgoings and to have very, very supportive mother who's let me live at her house for many, many years.
We've got a community. It's not just that. We've got a community that supported us.
No, sure. No, we absolutely do. But I mean, you know, we are really, hopefully, the antithesis of the Amazon. And I think, you know, Amazon and brands like that, where people are sick and tired of these huge companies really not giving a shit about their workers or about the planet, and really want to support a brand like us. You know, the future is going to be run, sadly, by the Amazons of this world. But I think there's going to be a big bounce back for people wanting to do something independent, something creative, you know, and to treat their workers properly. So there's a tipping point, but I think it's going to, you know, people are appreciating small independent brands a lot more now.
Agreed, and I think COVID's done that no end. Although it's just directly affected the high street, I think it's going to change the way people spend their money, because it's not about convenience. If they've got nowhere to be and they can spend the extra day waiting for a delivery from another company who can't match Amazon's same day delivery, they'll do it. And there are actual communities and people sharing sort of memes of going, well, actually, if you go to Amazon, find your product, type it into Google or whatever, find it from the supplier, and you can usually, in some cases, get it cheaper. Yeah, you'll wait longer or whatever, but you're putting food on somebody else's table. You're putting clothes on somebody else's kid's back. And if we can reveal to the people those intimate links between all of these things, why would you not do that? Well, you know what I mean? Who in their right mind, if they were informed and could see that chain of events, would not rather pay a little bit extra and wait a bit longer to then actually keep their community alive, rather than push other people into destitution and poverty?
Well, on the same point, you've noticed probably how Extinction Rebellion is basically not in the news anymore. It's not in the news because of COVID. Something's replaced it, but the planet is still dying and still collapsing. And the more people are poor, the less they get to think about things like that, you know? Yeah. So it is a very interesting and quite scary time that we find ourselves in at the moment. But, you know, hopefully this is going to be COVID, and everything else that's going on is going to be a uniting force as opposed to a dividing force. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, well,
fair play to you as well, Simba, for doing what you're doing. And I just want to, as Ash has just given me so much bromance, I want to give him some bromance back. Because 5 years ago, I was close to packing it in. Every year I've been close to packing it in, but it is my life. And without Ash coming along and helping me, I probably, after the screen printer burnt down 5 years ago, I probably would have jacked it all in. So got a proper job. So yeah, much love to Ash as well.
The problem with these T-shirts is that when you say nice things about me, you can really see when my nipples. So they're really thin. You need to do something about it. Just there, Gav.
Well, that is an absolutely wonderful way to end this podcast. Thank you both, honestly, for being a guest, and thank you for your kind words. Honestly, this is my new passion in life, is to try and create a platform beyond bias where we can discuss ideas and concepts and really find some commonality rather than just further division. So once again, thank you both for coming. As I said, we'll have you again as guests. We'll link to the shop and everything below so that people can keep up to date with what you guys are doing and your rather controversial Facebook feed. Once again, just thank you very much for joining. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, or if you're listening to this on one of the many podcast platforms, please do check us out on patreon.com/the Simpa Life, where you can help support and sponsor us for less than a cup of tea a week. Thank you very much, guys. Check us out on all platforms at The Simpa Life. I have been Simpa, he's been Magga, and these two wonderful folks have been Gav and Ash from THTC. Go check them out.
Thanks, guys.